Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Yu-Gi-Oh! Gallery. My name is Nuke, and this is Art of the Cards. This series is fundamentally focused on grading the art of Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards, looking at the aesthetics of the art, how it syncs up to the effect, and how it relates to the card's name. We grade the cards out of 10, with 10 being an artistic masterpiece and 1 being a waste of cardboard and man-hours. This time, we'll be examining an archetype solely used by friendless loners who came over to Yu-Gi-Oh! To try and get some socialization, but then chose the absolute wrong archetype to do so with. That's right, we're looking at Psy-Frames. They're based around two main cards, with Psy-Frame Driver and Psy-Frame Multithreader, who are equipped with the various Psy-Frame gear cards and eventually synchro summon into Psy-Frame Lord monsters like Zeta, Omega, and eventually, newly, Lambda. The gimmick is actually really interesting, and the negation effects that make up the core theme of the archetype, along with the ability to play on your opponent's turn, tie in very well to the fact that these are supposed to be psychically active beings, who are able to predict your opponent's actions and therefore take efforts to prevent them. So, without further ado, let's put on our tinfoil hats, shoot lightning from our assholes, and take a look at Psy-Frames. Psy-Frame Driver is their core card, and looks pretty nice. The card has an extremely dynamic pose, seeming to rocket off at the viewer, with the entire card being stretched out to provide this incredibly movement-oriented pose, the hands and legs extending as much as possible as the right hand is flung back, and the left hand seems to grasp at the ground to propel it even further. The color scheme is excellent, with the deep purple and gold working very well together, the gold even looking like a form of conductor for the green lightning that courses through the card. The background is decent, if somewhat generic, the rays cast out seeming to go through black clouds as the card explodes from a singular point. It matches the flavor text so well, the card saying that it rides on currents of lightning, the suit it's wearing amplifying its power. I choose to believe that that's why he's presented with this kind of gunmetal silvery skin and the gold stuff around his face, but I do appreciate that the designs are actually little lightning bolts. That's a fun little bit. The lightning coursing from his head and wrists actually helps to match the flavor text as well, showing his mind as the source for his incredible powers. This card gets a 7 out of 10. It's a really nice card with a lot of good elements. I especially do love the overall pose he has. It's very primal and quick looking, and with a better background it could have even gotten an 8 out of 10. Psy-Frame Multithreader is the next card, and looks really good as well. A counterpart to Psy-Frame Driver, it fits its name with a plethora of different effects that helps it to act as an effective part of the archetype. The art is different, but good, sharing design elements like the gold bangles around the arms and the lightning elements in both accoutrements on her dress tunic thing and the lightning that runs around it. Once again, it keeps the element of having the lightning originate in the head, and the background is genuinely excellent. It helps to tie things together well, and the lights in the background help to reference its synchro effect as well. In the anime especially, you had the levels turning into light bulbs that would eventually form this thing in synchro summon. And the circuitry is a nice background element that actually shows up on a lot of other cards as well. This card gets a 7 out of 10, it's really nice. Psy-Frame Gear Alpha is the first piece of equipment that can be placed onto Driver in order to give it some boosts to the card as a whole. The card looks decent, with a few things that prevent it from getting a higher grade in my eyes. The design itself is quite interesting. The mask with the spinning spikes to the side and the spiky shoulder pads along with the leather belt, it looks familiar. Wait, give me a second. Holy shit, this is a Vizier Des retrain. Okay, it's not totally similar, but there are a lot of shared design elements. While Vizier Des was designed to destroy stuff though, this empowers them and amplifies their psychotic might. It does look quite BDSM-y though, and the spikes and leather are a good callback to old school Yu-Gi-Oh! I actually do quite like it. Another element of the card I like though is the belt towards the bottom making the alpha symbol. It's a nice callback to the name, and it's something that sets it apart from the rest one, as most don't really. The black leather and steel gray along with the gold highlights at the tip of the mask spikes are nice and work well together, and the background is decent enough. The chest piece looks a bit strange though, the tubing and the gem in the center all seem pretty out of place. The background is just decent as well, and the rest of the card looks good enough, and the effect is also nice, coming along with a Psy-Frame Driver in order to create a new monster, so it gets a 7 out of 10. It's actually got quite a lot of good theming behind it, and despite some issues with the design, which honestly probably should put this at a 6 out of 10, it shares some elements, and it has some extra things that other monsters don't, which makes me want to give this a higher grade. It is a low 7 out of 10 though, so just keep that in mind. Their next card is Psy-Frame Gear Beta, and is also fairly decent. The card has a face of some kind this time, being part of the emblem on a piece on the center, with the rest of the card acting as a faux body, and the 2 wires with gold clips on them being emblematic of hands. The design is decent enough, even if the card is flipped on the actual monster it ends up equipped to, Psy-Frame Lord Zeta, but it is decent enough as a piece of living equipment, even if it does get slightly modified when equipped to Zeta in its final form. The background is really nice though, returning to the circuit lines that appeared on Psy-Frame Multithreader, and the directionality of the background matches the card pretty well, seeming to zip off to the bottom right. The visual effects are fairly standard as well, with a lightning that communicates power that this card imparts to Driver, and the effect works as well, being a protection effect that seems to be nice, with regards to taking advantage of this by predicting your opponent's attack, and the banish effect synergizes later with the other cards. It gets a 5 out of 10 though. It's pretty good, but I would have liked to see more of a link between the art and the name, something that gave it that beta link like it did with Alpha and the art there. Psy-Frame Gear Delta is their next gear and takes the form of a mantle and gauntlets that goes over Psy-Frame Driver's head to help him form Psy-Frame Lord Omega. Once again, it's fairly good. The design is competent enough with a good color scheme, and the gold and silver with black highlights works well against the green and black background, and the lightning once again looks good and fits in with the theme. The effect is competent, this time working to negate spells, and it fits in with the rest of the archetype as a whole. I'm not exactly sure why this has these like arching elements that forms like above Psy-Frame Gear Omega's head though. It seems like a weird thing to do, and it's pretty good though. I would give it a 6 out of 10. It has some good elements, and you could maybe argue that the way that it's arched, it seems to try and evoke the delta sign from the Greek alphabet. Psy-Frame Gear Ellipson is honestly a little terrifying. It eventually links up with Psy-Frame Gear Gamma to form like the weird scooter thing that Psy-Frame Lord Omega rides on, but at the moment it's just terrifying. It eventually changes to somewhat accommodate the rest of the cards, but the snaky bit that forms a connector between Ellipson and Gamma turns into a horrifying parody of horse legs, shooting it along a path of light in a very disturbing way. The lack of a full leg, both of them full of circuitry, is really disturbing, and I'm not a big fan. The background is nice though, with the circuit lines giving way to a hallway of light that Ellipson is running down, and the rest of the card is pretty decent overall. It gets a 5 out of 10 though, despite the horrifying nature of the art. It works well considering the card's inhuman nature, and the creativity involved, even if it is unsettling, is nice to see, but the rest of the card is thoroughly average. It plays into the themes of the archetype, it does what it needs to, it's competent. Psy-Frame Gear Gamma is their last main deck monster, and once again conforms to many of the same design decisions that others do. It has a swooping, elongated design that lends itself well to being added onto Driver later on, and it looks decent here, although thankfully without the strange and horrifying legs that Ellipson has. It looks good, and I really don't even mind the design being somewhat derivative of Ellipson's, considering that they do combine to create the scooter that Driver rides on when he's Omega. The eyes in the helmet look good this time as well, the eyes and the changed headset being really nice. The effect is standard as anything, and it looks really good, but it does get a 6 out of 10. It's mildly less horrifying than Ellipson, and it combines its elements together well. And the sheer change it has, going from this animalistic posture to this big, imposing, restrained thing, is a wonder to behold. It does go together very well and does get this 7 out of 10. I love how we can see everything fit together. And now, by all your powers combined, Alpha, Beta, Delta, Ellipson, and Gamma, I am Psy-Frame Lord Omega! My gosh, that was dorky. Alright, basically, Psy-Frame Lord Omega is their final boss monster. It's a combination of Driver with all of the frame gears, forming this massively powerful monster with a host of excellent effects. This card is amazing, showing off how each frame gear interacts, with Delta and Alpha around the shoulders, with Beta around the waist, and Ellipson Gamma forming the lightning-powered death scooter he's riding on. The card looks insane and high-octane, the crackling amount of massive lightning in the background seeming to stretch far in the distances. The card rushes down this tunnel of psychic power. It helps a lot in communicating a big aspect of the archetype, which is speed, the lore of the archetype, seeming just to be that this madman decides to go on a rampage one day, armors himself up with as much restricted technology as possible, and decides to go on a high-octane binge. It looks great, and the effect is excellent as well, being a strongly amplified version of Zeta's, and the card just looks excellent. It is amazing, and for its massive over-the-topness, for its sheer ludicrous excess, this card gets an 8 out of 10. It looks amazing and has so many good elements, and I just love how everything seems to fit together so well, and the entire archetype looks like it was designed around this very interesting gimmick and this whole idea of combining into one person. Psy-Frame Lord Lamba is their newest monster, and is actually pretty interesting as far as support goes. It's a Link monster, and seems to be Psy-Frame Multithreader finally getting some equips after all these years with a new design and a pretty interesting update on some of the older design conventions. The blackish green of the backgrounds is gone, making this card much lighter in terms of overall theme. It continues and adds on well to Multithreader though, giving the blue skirt it had, while adding on these black and gold shoulder pads, this dainty hat crown affair, and an interesting bangle and sash thing from the wrist. Beyond that, the shoulder pads also seem to have this weird translucent green cape behind it, which I'm not really a fan of, and honestly I think messes slightly with the aesthetic of the archetype as a whole. Beyond that, the art is slightly disappointing. I mean, it looks decent, and I like how it seeks to update Multithreader's design in particular, but at the same time, I'm not a fan of how they did it. I liked the predominantly silver design of the previous cards, and it could have gone extremely well with the blue on this card. It's honestly kind of a disappointment in the effect as well, not being much else other than enabling plays, but not doing much for a thematic effect, and in the end, it's honestly probably closer to a 4 out of 10. There's elements about it which kind of clash. You know, Psy-Frame Driver was this massive, high-octane thing, and I just don't get that same feeling from this one. While the card does indeed have the pullback to a singular point that a lot of the other cards have, it just seems a bit too light. The rest of the cards had a very dark green and black color scheme, which made the prominent silver and black of their bodies along with the gold highlights stand out even more. This card looks washed out in comparison, especially with the translucent green cloak that seems to shimmy out behind her. It's honestly kind of disappointing, and I'm not a big fan of how it makes the card look so distinct from the rest of the archetype, but without really adding anything to it. It seems to be different for a difference's sake, and it doesn't really connect thematically, artistically, with the rest of the archetype as a whole. So in the end, this card does get a 4 out of 10. It's not particularly great. Moving on to their spells and traps though, Psy-Frame's Circuit is excellent, with it showing a super lightning-y version of a magical girl suiting up sequence, but with Psy-Frame Driver and all the equip cards becoming Omega instead of a Sailor Scout. It looks really good, and all the pieces come together in this massive display of electricity. It looks kind of busy though, which is a problem with a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh cards, but in this case, the light cast on the bottom of the card would have helped it out a bit. While I complained about Lambda being a bit too light, which I do think it is, this has the opposite problem of being a bit too dark, especially when it's shrunk down to fit the size of a Yu-Gi-Oh card. It looks kinda weird. The background works well though, the green circuit lines we've set up being lit up in grand style with yellow light. However, it seems to fade into light green towards the center of the card, which I'm not a fan of, mostly because it blends into this sickening yellow-greenish mess. The effect is excellent though, being the thing that unlocks your ability to play on your opponent's turn, which makes massive amount of sense given the fact that this name, the card's name, implies this completes the circuit. Overall, it gets a 7 out of 10, some issues with the background and lighting being what prevents it from a higher score. The Psy-Frame Accelerator looks pretty nice actually. The card shows what looks like Omega rushing forward, chasing a ghostly image of himself, and the card works well. The art showing the quickness of the card, the ghostly image seeming to tie into the effect, and the background and circuit lines are all excellent. The way it moves towards the back being an effective way of communicating speed, and beyond that, the effect is pretty good, syncing up with Psy-Frame Lord Omega and being a decent way of getting stuff out on the board regardless, and the Phantom Image actually might be the banished monster from the card's effect. I wish it had gone farther in the art though. The picture could have looked more distorted and stretched to make it seem like he is going the fastest he has ever been in his life, but it works well enough and it gets a 6 out of 10. It is above average, but it lacks some of the things necessary to really push it up, and honestly I feel like a certain amount of stylization and stretch in a lot of these cards would have pushed them up higher as well to help communicate that quick nature. Psy-Frame Overload is actually also really good, and it takes the route I hoped Accelerator would take and is also pretty over the top. It shows Omega doing a sick kickflip spiral while lightning pisses out of the back of the scooter he rides. It looks really good and ties into the whole lore of the archetype, being him going on in this incredibly unhinged psychic joyride as lightning craps out of his body. The double movement of the card is really nice as well. The movement of card towards the front while the explosion seems to echo that is really nice, and I feel like once again the card could have been distinguished a bit more. Sometimes they can get a bit lost in each other and it can be hard to pick out the details from the blackish bluish mass in the middle, but this one looks okay. The effect is also really nice, and the overload part of the name coming back as it banishes stuff from your opponent's field. The massive amount of power this is exhibiting starting to transfer monster from your opponent's side into other dimensions. It gets a 7 out of 10. There's an expressiveness to the card which I really like and makes it really awesome. This was probably a shorter review, but I do like this archetype as a whole. They had a really interesting idea behind it, and a lot of their cards share a good thematic punch, which helps them out a lot. It is a shame though then that some of the art couldn't have been better, and it lacked a lot of what it needed, or maybe the over-the-topness needed in a lot of the cards to bring it to a higher grade overall. My card of the archetype, though, probably has to be Psy-Frame Overload. It's not the highest individual card in the set, but it exemplifies what I like about the archetype as a whole, that it's this incredibly high-octane bash of a card which just shows Omega kick-flipping and doing all this cool stuff that I really do enjoy. I think it encapsulates what really makes the soul of the archetype work. Beyond that, the archetype as a whole does get, I would say, like a 6 out of 10. This archetype is above average, it has some very good cards, but overall it lacks a lot of the expressiveness that I would have wanted to see in some of the cards to really bring it up to a higher grade. In any case, thank you very much for watching. Please remember to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to get updates on all my future videos. And so, without further ado, this is Nuke, signing out. Have a good one, ladies and gentlemen.